Staff Sergeant Ryan Torres stood in his driveway, holding his two daughters tight while his wife Jennifer tried not to cry. It was one of those September mornings where everything feels too normal for what's about to happen. The neighbors were mowing their lawns. Kids were riding bikes down the street, and Ryan was about to leave for 8 months to serve overseas. "Daddy, do you really have to go?" his youngest daughter whispered against his chest. Ryan felt his heart crack a little, but he just smiled and kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. "You take care of Mommy for me, okay?" Jennifer walked him to his truck, gripping his hand like she might never let go. They'd been through deployments before, but it never got easier. Their house in Cedar Valley had been their safe haven for 5 years now. It was a small 3-bedroom place with a backyard where the girls played, and a garage where Ryan worked on his old motorcycle. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. "I've got this," Jennifer assured him, reading the worry in his eyes. "The bills are on autopay. The house is fine. We'll be fine." Ryan nodded, though leaving never felt right. He kissed her one more time, climbed into his truck, and drove away, watching his family get smaller in the rearview mirror until they disappeared completely. The first 3 months overseas were rough, like they always are. Ryan's unit was stationed at a forward operating base where the days blurred together in a mix of patrols, paperwork, and trying not to think too much about home. He called Jennifer whenever he could, hearing about the girls' school projects and soccer games, holding on to those normal moments like a lifeline. Back home, Jennifer was juggling everything like she always did. She worked full-time as a nurse, picked the girls up from school, helped with homework, and somehow kept the house running. Money was tight with Ryan's deployment pay being their only income, but they were managing. They always did. Then one afternoon in early December, a certified letter arrived. Jennifer almost didn't open it because she was rushing to get the girls to dance class, but something about the official-looking envelope made her stop. She tore it open standing in the driveway, her dance bag slung over her shoulder. Her stomach dropped as she read the words. The Cedar Valley Homeowners Association was demanding $12,000 in special assessments for community improvements. $12,000. The letter said the money was due immediately, and if they didn't pay, legal action would follow. Jennifer read it 3 times, convinced she was missing something. Special assessments? What improvements? They'd been paying their regular HOA dues every month like clockwork. She'd never heard anything about special fees or community projects. And $12,000? They didn't have that kind of money just lying around. She tried calling the HOA office the next morning. No answer. She called again at lunch. No answer. She left voicemails that were never returned. She sent emails that bounced back with error messages. It was like the HOA office had vanished into thin air. The second letter arrived a week later, more threatening than the first. It talked about liens and foreclosure and legal proceedings. Jennifer's hands shook as she read it. This had to be some kind of mistake. People don't just lose their homes over HOA fees, especially when their husband is overseas serving his country. She finally took a day off work and drove to the HOA office in person. The woman at the front desk barely looked up from her computer. "I need to speak to someone about this letter," Jennifer said, sliding the document across the desk. "There's been some kind of mistake." The woman glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. "President Dalton handles all collection matters. He's not available. When will he be available? I don't have his schedule. Can I make an appointment?" "He doesn't take appointments." Jennifer felt frustration rising in her chest. "My husband is deployed overseas. We've never missed an HOA payment. I don't understand what these special assessments are for or why." "The information is all in the letter," the woman interrupted, already looking back at her computer. "If you have questions, you can submit them in writing. I've sent emails. Nobody responds." The woman shrugged and handed Jennifer another envelope. "This is the final notice. Have a good day." Jennifer sat in her car in the parking lot and cried. Not the gentle tears that come from sadness, but the angry, frustrated sobs of someone who knows something is very wrong, but has no idea how to fix it. She called her sister, her mom, even her neighbor who'd been on the HOA board years ago. Everyone said the same thing. This didn't sound right. HOAs couldn't just demand thousands of dollars out of nowhere. Could they? 2 weeks crawled by. Jennifer tried everything she could think of. She went back to the HOA office twice more, only to be turned away. She called lawyers, but consultation fees alone were more than she could afford. She tried to reach Ryan through military channels, but his unit was in the field and communication was restricted. She felt completely alone, fighting an invisible enemy she didn't understand. Then came the day that changed everything. Jennifer was at work in the middle of her shift at the hospital when her phone started buzzing nonstop. Her neighbor was calling, then another neighbor, then another. She stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding, and answered. "Jennifer, there are sheriff's deputies at your house," her neighbor said, her voice high with panic. "And people from the HOA. They're changing your locks." Jennifer felt the floor tilt under her feet. "What? No, that's not possible. They can't. They're doing it right now. I'm standing in my yard watching it happen. You need to get here." Jennifer didn't remember the drive home. 1 minute she was standing in the hospital hallway. The next she was screeching into her driveway behind 2 sheriff's vehicles and a locksmith's van. People she'd never seen before were walking in and out of her house. Her house, carrying clipboards and taking pictures and talking into phones like they owned the place. A moving truck was backed up to her garage, and workers were loading boxes. Her stuff, her family's belongings being packed up by strangers. "Stop," Jennifer screamed, jumping out of her car. "What are you doing?" "This is my house." A tall man in an expensive suit turned to face her with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Torres, I'm Richard Dalton, president of the Cedar Valley HOA. I'm afraid this property has been seized for non-payment of dues." "Seized? You can't seize someone's house. My husband is deployed. We're protected. You received multiple notices of the debt and failed to respond." Dalton interrupted smoothly. "The HOA filed a lien, obtained a judgment, and foreclosed on the property. It's all legal. This home now belongs to the HOA." Jennifer felt like she was going to be sick. "I was never notified of any hearing. I tried to contact you. Nobody would talk to me." Dalton pulled out a folder. "All notifications were properly sent to this address. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything left will be disposed of." He turned and walked back into her house. Her house, where her daughters had taken their first steps. Where Ryan had proposed to her in the backyard under the stars, where every wall held memories of their life together. Jennifer stood on her own lawn, watching strangers box up her family's life, and realized that everything she thought was safe and solid and protected had just disappeared. And Ryan was 8,000 miles away with no idea their entire world was falling apart. Part 2. Jennifer sat on her sister's couch at 2 in the morning, staring at her phone like it might somehow connect her to Ryan. Her daughters were asleep in the spare bedroom, curled up together in a twin bed that was way too small for both of them. Everything they owned was crammed into her sister's garage in boxes that those HOA workers had packed. She'd been homeless for 3 days now, and it still didn't feel real. Her sister Kelly brought her another cup of coffee, even though Jennifer hadn't touched the last one. "Did you reach him yet?" "I filed a Red Cross message," Jennifer said, her voice hollow. "But his unit is on operations. It could take weeks before he even gets it. And by then," she couldn't finish the sentence. "By then what? Their house would be sold? Their life would be completely dismantled." She didn't even know where to begin fixing this nightmare. The next morning, Jennifer called every lawyer in the phone book. Most wanted retainer fees she couldn't afford. The ones who would talk to her for free gave her the same devastating news. Technically, the HOA had followed the law. Barely, but they'd done it. Finally, a lawyer named Patterson agreed to look at her case for a reduced fee that Jennifer's mom helped her borrow. He was an older man with kind eyes who reminded Jennifer of her grandfather. And when he reviewed all her paperwork, his expression grew darker and darker. "Mrs. Torres, I'm going to be straight with you," he said, sitting back in his chair. "What they did was legal, but just barely. They sent notices to your home address." "I check the mail every day," Jennifer interrupted. "I never got anything about a hearing. They claim they sent it. Whether you actually received it is another matter. The special assessments were voted on at a board meeting, but the notice about that meeting was sent to an email address that you apparently never check." "What email address?" He showed her. It was an old email she'd set up years ago when they first moved in. Something like Jennifer.Torres Cedar Valley. She'd completely forgotten it existed. She certainly never checked it. "They sent one notice to that email, which went to your spam folder," Patterson explained. "Technically, that counts as notification under the HOA bylaws. The special assessments passed at a meeting you didn't attend because you didn't know about it. Then when you didn't pay fees you didn't know existed, they filed a lien. The foreclosure hearing notice was mailed to your home address. I never got it, Jennifer insisted. I believe you, but they have proof they mailed it. Whether it actually arrived or got lost or was deliberately intercepted, we can't prove. Jennifer felt tears burning her eyes. So they just get away with stealing my house? Patterson's jaw tightened. Here's what concerns me most.
I did some research after you called.
Richard Dalton has done this before. 3 other properties in Cedar Valley in the past 18 months, all foreclosed for special assessments. One family was going through a medical emergency. Another was dealing with a divorce. And now you, with your husband deployed. He targets people who can't fight back, Jennifer whispered. That's exactly what he does. And here's the interesting part. All 3 of those properties were sold to a company called Dalton Property Holdings, his company, at below market rates. The pieces clicked together in Jennifer's head and the picture they made was ugly. This is a scam. He finds vulnerable homeowners, hits them with fake fees, takes their houses and sells them to himself. That's my theory. Proving it is harder. He's careful to stay just inside the law. What about the fact that Ryan's deployed? Aren't there protections for military families? Patterson's eyes lit up. There absolutely are. The Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA. It protects active duty service members from foreclosure without court approval. Did the HOA get a court order? Jennifer pulled out all the documents she'd managed to save. They went through everything together, and slowly Patterson's expression changed from grim to determined. Mrs. Torres, they didn't follow SCRA procedures, not even close. They needed a court order to foreclose while your husband is on active duty. They needed to prove he was properly notified and had the opportunity to be represented. They did none of that. So the foreclosure is illegal, federally illegal. This isn't just an HOA matter anymore. This is a violation of federal law designed to protect service members. If we can get a federal court involved, we might be able to reverse this whole thing. For the first time in weeks, Jennifer felt a tiny spark of hope. But Patterson's next words tempered it. The problem is time. Dalton is moving fast. He's already listed your property for sale, and according to public records, there's a pending offer. From Dalton Property Holdings, of course. If that sale closes, getting your house back becomes much more complicated. Jennifer left the lawyer's office with a plan, but it was a fragile plan that depended on reaching Ryan, filing motions and moving faster than a system designed to move slowly. She spent the rest of that day trying everything she could think of. She went to the local news station with her story. They seemed interested at first, but after making some calls, they told her they couldn't run the piece. Mr. Dalton is a major advertiser, the producer said apologetically, and his lawyer threatened us with a defamation suit if we air anything that damages his reputation. She tried social media, posting her story in local community groups. Some people sympathized. Others suggested she must have done something wrong, that HOAs don't just take houses for no reason. A few people even defended Dalton, saying he was a respected businessman and she was probably just trying to avoid paying her bills. She contacted the other families Dalton had foreclosed on. The first 2 didn't want to talk, too traumatized by what had happened to relive it. But the third family, the Hendersons, met with her at a coffee shop. They told her a story almost identical to hers. Sudden special assessments, unanswered calls, a foreclosure that happened so fast they couldn't fight it. We tried to sue, Mrs. Henderson said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. We spent $20,000 on lawyers. Got nowhere. The system is designed to protect HOAs, not homeowners. They have all the power and we have none. But my husband's in the military, Jennifer said. There are federal protections. Then you might have a chance we didn't. Fight him. Please. Take that smug grin off. Richard Dalton's face for all of us. Jennifer gathered every piece of evidence she could find. She got statements from neighbors who'd witnessed the lockout. She documented every attempt she'd made to contact the HOA. She pulled bank records showing they'd never missed a regular HOA payment. She built a case brick by brick, document by document, and then finally her phone rang with a call from an overseas number. Jen? Ryan's voice sounded like it was coming from another planet. Baby, what's going on? I got a Red Cross message that said emergency. Are the girls okay? Are you okay? Jennifer sat down on her sister's front steps and told him everything. She heard his breathing change, heard him trying to control his anger. When she finished, there was a long silence. They took our house. Ryan finally said, his voice deadly quiet. While I'm over here, they took our house. Ryan, the lawyer says we might be able to fight this. There's a law that protects you. I'm coming home. What? You can't just— I'm coming home, Jen. I'm going to talk to my CO. This is exactly what the SCRA is for. They can't do this to military families. And if the system won't help us— He trailed off, and Jennifer heard something in his voice that made her both hopeful and worried. Ryan, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that I've got a whole platoon of brothers who would walk through fire for me. And when they hear about this, they're going to be just as angry as I am. The system failed you, baby. But my brothers won't. 3 days later, Jennifer picked Ryan up at the airport. But he didn't come home alone. Walking behind him, still in their desert camouflage uniforms with duffel bags over their shoulders, were 8 of his platoon members. They looked tired from the long flight, but their eyes were alert and focused. Staff Sergeant Mitchell stepped forward and hugged Jennifer like she was his own sister. Mrs. Torres, we're here to help. Nobody messes with one of ours. Jennifer looked at all these warriors who'd taken leave time, bought plane tickets, and traveled thousands of miles to help her family. You didn't have to do this. Yes, we did. Another soldier, Corporal Hayes, said simply. This is what brothers do. Ryan put his arm around Jennifer and looked at the house keys still sitting in her purse, the keys that no longer opened her doors. I've spent the last 8 months defending freedom overseas. Now it's time to defend my home, and this time I've got backup. Part 3. Ryan sat at Kelly's kitchen table surrounded by his platoon brothers, paperwork spread out everywhere like they were planning a mission, which in a way they were, just not the kind they'd trained for. Lieutenant Colonel Briggs had granted Ryan emergency leave once he'd seen all the documentation. This is exactly the kind of situation the SCRA was designed to prevent, Briggs had said before Ryan left. You have my full support, Sergeant Torres. Go get your house back. But support from his commanding officer was only the first step. Now Ryan was on the phone with a JAG officer, Judge Advocate General, military lawyers who specialized in cases exactly like this. Captain Williams listened to everything, asked pointed questions, and finally gave Ryan the words he'd been desperate to hear. Sergeant Torres, this is a clear SCRA violation. The HOA couldn't legally foreclose while you were on active duty, without a court order proving you were notified and represented. They did neither. I'm going to file an emergency motion tonight with the Federal District Court. We should have a hearing within 48 hours. What are the chances? Ryan asked. Given the facts, very good. But here's the problem. Dalton is trying to close the sale tomorrow morning. If that happens before we get a court order, the legal situation becomes messier. Not impossible, but messier. Ryan looked around at his brothers, all listening intently. So we need to slow him down. I can't advise you to do anything illegal, Sergeant. I'm not planning to break any laws, sir. I'm just planning to exercise my legal right to occupy my own property until the courts can sort this out. There was a pause on the line, and Ryan could almost hear the lawyer smiling. The property hasn't been legally transferred yet. Your name is still on the deed. Technically, you have every right to be there. That's what I thought. Thank you, sir. After hanging up, Ryan turned to his team. These weren't just soldiers. They were his family. Mitchell, who'd pulled him behind cover when bullets started flying in Kandahar. Hayes, who'd stayed up all night with him when they lost Johnson in that IED blast. Rodriguez, Patterson, Chen, Williams, Foster, and Lee. Every single one of them had bled for each other. And now they were here for a different kind of battle. Here's the situation, Ryan said, spreading out a hand-drawn map of his house in the Sur. Pounding streets. Dalton is planning to close the sale tomorrow at 9 a.m. Once that paperwork is signed, getting the house back gets complicated. We need to be in position before that happens. What's the plan, Sarge? Mitchell asked. We occupy the property. Peacefully, legally, but firmly. We're not breaking in because it's still legally my house until the sale closes. We're simply taking possession of what's mine, and we make it very clear that removing us won't be easy. Jennifer leaned forward. Won't they just call the police? They will, Ryan said. But Captain Williams is filing the federal injunction tonight. By the time the police arrive, we'll have federal paperwork showing the foreclosure was illegal. The cops won't remove us if there's a legitimate legal dispute with federal implications. What about media? Rodriguez suggested. Last time I checked, kicking military families out of their homes while they're deployed isn't a great look. Jennifer pulled out her phone. I contacted 3 local news stations. 2 wouldn't touch it because Dalton advertises with them, but Channel 7, the independent station, said they'd be very interested in covering this story, especially if it involves active duty soldiers. Perfect, Ryan said. We move at 0500 hours. That gives us 4 hours before Dalton even wakes up. We get in position, we make it visible, and we wait. When he shows up, he's going to have a choice, back down or have this fight play out on the evening news. What about force? Chen asked quietly. If they try to physically remove us? Ryan's expression hardened. We don't initiate any violence. Not one bit. We stay calm, we stay professional, and we stay put. But if anyone tries to forcibly remove us from my property, we defend ourselves using reasonable force only. We're in the right here, legally, morally, and every other way. We just need to be smart about how we do this. That night, none of them slept much. Jennifer packed bags with water, food, and supplies. The soldiers cleaned and pressed their uniforms. This wasn't combat gear, this was a show of solidarity and legitimacy. They reviewed the plan over and over, anticipating every possible response. At 4:30 in the morning, while it was still dark outside, they loaded into 3 vehicles and drove to Cedar Valley. The neighborhood was silent, houses dark, streets empty. They parked a block away and walked to Ryan's house on foot, boots crunching on the quiet pavement. Ryan stood in front of his own home, looking at the locks that had been changed, the property of Cedar Valley HOA notice taped to the front door. He felt anger burning in his chest, but he kept it controlled. Anger was fuel. He just needed to direct it properly. Rodriguez, you're good with locks, right? Ryan asked quietly. I am, Sarge. But isn't that breaking and entering? Ryan pulled out his wallet and showed them his driver's license. This is my legal address. My name is still on the deed. I'm entering my own property. The changed locks are illegal since the foreclosure violated federal law. Rodriguez grinned and pulled out a lockpick set. Well, when you put it that way. 2 minutes later, the front door swung open. Ryan stepped into his house for the first time in 4 months, and the smell of home hit him like a wave. Everything was still there, his furniture, his family photos, his daughter's toys. Dalton hadn't sold it off yet. He'd probably been waiting for the paperwork to finalize. Okay, people, let's get set up, Ryan said. Mitchell and Hayes, you're on the front porch. Rodriguez and Patterson, side yard. Shannon Williams, backyard. Foster Lee, you're with me inside. We want full visibility from the street. When Dalton shows up, I want him to see exactly what he's dealing with. As the sun started to rise, the platoon took their positions. Jennifer arrived with the girls just after 6, and Ryan hugged them so tight they squealed. Daddy, you're squishing us. I missed you so much, he whispered into their hair. And nobody's taking our house. Not today. Not ever. By 7 a.m., neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Peterson from next door came over, saw the soldiers in formation on the lawn, and burst into tears. Oh, Jennifer, you're back. We were so worried. Word spread fast. More neighbors came out bringing coffee and donuts. Some of them had been too afraid to speak up before. But seeing Ryan and his brothers standing firm gave them courage. Mr. Lewis from 3 doors down confessed that Dalton had tried the same scheme on him, but he'd paid the assessment even though he couldn't afford it. At 7:30, the Channel 7 news van pulled up. The reporter, a young woman named Kristen Webb, approached with her cameraman. Sergeant Torres? I'm from Channel 7. We'd love to hear your story. Ryan gave her a brief interview explaining everything while his brothers stood at attention behind him. The cameras captured it all. The determined soldiers, the supportive neighbors. The banner Jennifer had hung from the 2nd floor reading, Protected under SCRA, Illegal Foreclosure. At 8:45, Richard Dalton's Mercedes came screeching around the corner. He jumped out, his face already red with fury before he even reached the property line. Behind him came his lawyer and 2 sheriff's deputies. Dalton froze when he saw what was waiting for him. 8 soldiers in full-dress uniform, a gathering crowd of neighbors, news cameras rolling. His perfect, quiet little scam had just become very, very public. What is the meaning of this? He sputtered, storming toward the house. This is private property. Staff Sergeant Mitchell stepped forward, his 6'3" frame blocking Dalton's path. His voice was calm and professional, with just enough edge to make it clear he wasn't moving. Sir, this property belongs to Sergeant Torres, and the foreclosure that was executed while he was deployed overseas violated federal law. We're peacefully occupying this residence until proper legal proceedings can address this violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. You're trespassing, Dalton shouted, his composure cracking. Officers, arrest these men. The deputies looked uncomfortable. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton, we're going to need to see some documentation here. If there's a legitimate legal dispute..." Ryan came down from the porch holding a folder. "Deputy, here's the emergency injunction filed by Military Legal Counsel at 0200 hours this morning. Federal court is reviewing the case. The foreclosure violated SCRA protections, which makes it void. I'm exercising my legal right to occupy my own property." The deputy reviewed the paperwork, then looked at his partner. "We can't remove them, Mr. Dalton. This is a civil matter with federal implications. You'll need to let the courts sort it out. But the closing is in 15 minutes, Dalton protested. "Then I'd suggest postponing it," the deputy said. Dalton's lawyer pulled him aside for a heated conversation. Ryan could see the man's face going from red to purple, could see the exact moment when the lawyer explained just how much trouble they were in. The news cameras caught all of it. The angry HOA president, the calm professional soldiers, the growing crowd of neighbors now openly supporting the Torres family. By noon, the story would be on every local news site. By evening, it would be trending nationally. Dalton tried one more time. "You can't do this. I'll have you arrested for breaking and entering." Ryan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sir, with all due respect, I've spent the last 8 months defending this country in a combat zone. I think I can handle defending my own home. You made one big mistake. You thought my wife was alone. She's not. She's got me, and I've got my brothers. We don't leave anyone behind, not overseas and not here. The battle wasn't over." But as the sun rose higher and the crowd grew larger, Ryan knew they'd won the first critical engagement. Dalton was on his heels and the law was about to catch up with him. Part 4 Richard Dalton sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, he watched his perfectly planned operation fall apart in real time. Soldiers stood in formation on what was supposed to be his property. News cameras were broadcasting everything to thousands of viewers. And worst of all, his lawyer was telling him they might actually lose this. "What do you mean we might lose?" Dalton hissed into his phone, trying to keep his voice down even though rage was building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. "I followed every step, every legal requirement." His attorney's voice was tight on the other end. "You didn't follow SCRA requirements. The Service Members Civil Relief Act specifically prohibits foreclosing on active duty military members without court approval. You needed a judge to sign off on this and you didn't get that. Nobody told me about that. That's because you rushed the foreclosure. This is Fed. Arrow law, Richard. And now you've got 8 soldiers, 3 news stations, and what looks like half the neighborhood watching. Do you understand how bad this looks?" Dalton ended the call and stared at Ryan Torres standing on that porch like he owned it. Well, technically he still did own it, Dalton's lawyer had just informed him. The sale couldn't close with a federal injunction in place. And the injunction wasn't going anywhere because the violation was clear-cut. For the first time in 3 years of running this scheme, Dalton felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: fear. Inside the house, Ryan was coordinating with Captain Williams on speakerphone while his platoon maintained their positions outside. Jennifer made sandwiches in her own kitchen for the first time in weeks, still not quite believing they were back home. "The federal hearing is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow," Williams explained. "The judge is taking this seriously. SCRA violations aren't taken lightly, especially when the service member is literally deployed in a combat zone." "What's the worst-case scenario?" Ryan asked. "Worst case? The foreclosure gets voided, which is basically guaranteed. But that's not the worst case for Dalton. Once this investigation opens up, federal prosecutors are going to look at his other foreclosures. If there's a pattern, and I suspect there is, he's looking at fraud charges, RICO charges, and civil penalties that could bankrupt him." Ryan allowed himself a small smile. "So he's scared. He should be. What you're doing right now is perfect. You're exercising your legal rights, staying peaceful, and letting him dig his own grave deeper with every response. Keep it up." Outside, the standoff continued all morning. More neighbors came by to show support. Someone brought a cooler full of drinks. Mrs. Chen from the corner house brought her famous cookies. It started feeling less like a confrontation and more like a community gathering. But Dalton wasn't giving up. Around noon, a private security company showed up with 6 guards in tactical gear. They looked intimidating, all muscle and sunglasses and attitude. The crowd went quiet as they approached. The lead security guard, a thick-necked man with a shaved head, walked right up to Staff Sergeant Mitchell. "We're here to secure this property for the legal owner. You need to vacate immediately." Mitchell didn't move an inch. His voice stayed calm and professional. "The legal owner is right there on the porch. Sergeant Torres, and we're not vacating. Then we'll remove you by force." That's when Hayes stepped forward from the side yard, followed by Rodriguez and Patterson from the other side. Chen, Williams, Foster, and Lee emerged from the backyard. 8 soldiers, all veterans of actual combat, formed a loose perimeter around the property. They weren't being aggressive. They just made it very clear that removing them would not be easy. "You really want to do this?" Mitchell asked quietly. "You really want to put your hands on United States military personnel who are peacefully occupying their own legally owned property while defending their rights under federal law, with news cameras watching?" The security guard looked at his team, then at the soldiers, then at the growing crowd and media presence. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't a situation that could be solved with muscle and intimidation. This was already a public relations disaster, and starting a physical fight would make it infinitely worse. "Call your boss," Ryan said from the porch. "Tell him this doesn't end with security guards. This ends in a courtroom." The security team retreated to their vehicles to make calls. Ryan watched them go, feeling the tension release slightly from his shoulders. Jennifer came out and handed him a bottle of water. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine. They're not going to escalate this. They can't afford to," but he was wrong. Around 3 p.m. things got worse. A code enforcement officer showed up with a clipboard and a bad attitude. He started citing violations: grass too long, paint peeling on the fence, improper signage. Each violation came with a fine. He slapped the citations on the front door one after another. "What are you doing?" Jennifer demanded. "This property is in violation of multiple city codes," the officer said without looking up from his clipboard. "Each violation is $500 per day until corrected." Ryan recognized what this was immediately. Retaliation. Dalton must have friends in the city government. If he couldn't remove them legally, he'd try to bleed them with fines. But before Ryan could respond, something unexpected happened. Mr. Lewis, the neighbor who'd almost been victimized by Dalton himself, stepped forward with his lawnmower. "I'll cut the grass right now." Mrs. Peterson pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my son. He's a painter. We'll have that fence fixed by tonight." More neighbors volunteered. Someone ran home to get tools. What was meant to intimidate turned into a community work party. People were repairing Ryan's property faster than the code officer could write citations. The officer looked flustered, tried to write more violations, but eventually gave up and left. The crowd actually cheered. By evening, local veterans organizations started arriving. VFW members, American Legion posts, and Marine Corps League representatives came with flags and banners. They formed a ring around the property, not aggressive but absolutely unmovable. What started with 8 soldiers had grown into dozens of veterans standing together. A Gold Star mother, Mrs. Thompson, approached Ryan with tears in her eyes. She'd lost her son in Iraq 5 years ago. "What they did to you is what they tried to do to me," she said. "I fought for 2 years to keep my house after my son died. Finally had to sell it just to stop the legal bills. Seeing you fight back, it means everything." Ryan hugged her, feeling the weight of it all. This wasn't just about his house anymore. It was about every vulnerable family that had been targeted by predatory HOAs and corrupt officials who abused their power. As the sun set, Dalton made one last attempt. He showed up with his lawyer and a local judge who'd apparently owed him a favor. The judge, a thin man with hard eyes, approached with an order to vacate. "This is a court order requiring you to leave this property immediately pending resolution of the ownership dispute," the judge said. Ryan took the order and read it carefully. Then he handed it to Captain Williams on speakerphone. There was a long pause while the JAG officer reviewed it. "Your Honor," Williams said through the phone speaker loud enough for everyone to hear. "This order was issued by a local circuit court. The federal injunction takes precedence. Under SCRA protections and federal law, Sergeant Torres has the right to occupy this property until the federal court resolves the matter. With respect, your order doesn't supersede federal authority." The judge's face went red. He wasn't used to being challenged. But he also knew Williams was right. Federal law trumped local courts. He looked at Dalton, then at the crowd of veterans and news cameras, and seemed to realize he'd been dragged into something that could damage his own reputation. This matter will be resolved in federal court tomorrow, he said stiffly, then turned and left. Dalton stood there for a moment longer, staring at Ryan with pure hatred in his eyes. You're making a big mistake, Torres. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ryan met his gaze steadily. No, Mr. Dalton, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You thought you could take advantage of my family while I was gone. You were wrong. And tomorrow a federal judge is going to explain to you exactly how wrong you were. That night, the platoon took shifts keeping watch. They didn't expect real trouble, but nobody wanted to take chances. Ryan sat on his porch in the darkness, Jennifer beside him, watching his brothers patrol the property like they were guarding a fire base overseas. Do you think we'll really win? Jennifer asked quietly. The law is on our side. The evidence is clear, and we've got the attention of federal prosecutors now. Yeah, we're going to win. But more importantly, everyone watching this story is going to see what happens when communities stand together against corruption. That's bigger than just our house. In his car down the street, Richard Dalton sat in the darkness making phone calls. But the people who used to take his calls were suddenly unavailable. His lawyer was talking about plea deals. His business partners were distancing themselves. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling, and he could feel the walls closing in. The battle would officially end in a courtroom the next morning. But everyone involved already knew how it would end. Justice had been delayed, but it was coming, and it was bringing friends. Part 5. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix was packed by 9 a.m. Ryan sat at the plaintiff's table in his dress uniform, Jennifer beside him in a borrowed business suit. Behind them, the gallery was filled with his platoon brothers, neighbors from Cedar Valley, veterans from across the state, and media from what seemed like every news outlet in Arizona. Richard Dalton sat across the aisle with 3 expensive lawyers surrounding him like shields. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His usually confident posture had been replaced with something that looked more like barely controlled panic. Judge Catherine Morrison entered the courtroom, and everyone stopped. Ferdin. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd served as a Marine Corps JAG officer before becoming a federal judge. Ryan felt a small surge of hope. She would understand what the SCRA meant and why it mattered. The hearing lasted 3 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Captain Williams presented the evidence methodically. Deployment orders showing Ryan was on active duty during the foreclosure. Documentation that no court order was obtained under SCRA. Proof that the HOA knew about Ryan's military status. And evidence that proper notification procedures weren't followed. Dalton's lawyers tried to argue that all local procedures were followed, that the notices were properly sent, that they didn't know about SCRA requirements. Each argument was dismantled by the facts. The law was clear, and they'd violated it completely. Judge Morrison didn't hide her displeasure. Mr. Dalton, the Service Members Civil Relief Act exists specifically to protect military members and their families from exactly this kind of situation. These protections are not optional. They're not suggestions. They're federal law. The fact that you foreclosed on an active-duty Marine's home while he was deployed in a combat zone, without obtaining the required court order, without ensuring proper representation, is not only illegal but frankly shameful. She voided the foreclosure immediately. Ryan felt Jennifer grab his hand and squeeze. They'd won. Their house was officially theirs again, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. The pattern of behavior described in the evidence suggests this wasn't an isolated mistake, but potentially systematic fraud. Dalton's face went white. His lawyers immediately huddled around him, whispering urgently. The courtroom erupted in applause until Morrison's gavel brought order back. Outside the courthouse, Ryan was mobbed by reporters. He kept his statement simple. This wasn't just about my family. It was about protecting all military families and homeowners from predatory practices. I'm grateful for the legal system working the way it's supposed to, and I'm especially grateful for my brothers who stood with me. The platoon stood behind him as he spoke, and when one reporter asked Staff Sergeant Mitchell why they'd all taken leave to help, his answer was simple, because that's what brothers do. You don't leave people behind. Not in combat, not at home, never. The story went viral. Within days, news outlets across the country picked it up. Social media exploded with support. Veterans groups rallied. Housing advocacy organizations reached out. Ryan's story became a rallying point for HOA reform nationwide. But the real fallout for Richard Dalton was just beginning. The federal investigation Captain Williams had predicted came swiftly and thoroughly. FBI agents seized records from the Cedar Valley HOA office and from Dalton Property Holdings. What they found was damning. Over the past 4 years, Dalton had orchestrated foreclosures on 17 properties, all following the same pattern: target vulnerable homeowners, hit them with excessive special assessments, rush through foreclosure proceedings with minimal notification, then purchase the properties through his own company at below-market rates. The total fraud was estimated at over $2 million. The other families he'd victimized came forward once Ryan's story made headlines. The Hendersons, who'd lost their home during a medical crisis. The Parkers, who'd been targeted during a divorce. The Vuongs, an elderly couple who'd been confused by the legal process. Each family had been too scared or too broke to fight back effectively. Until now. Jennifer spent hours on the phone with these families, connecting them with lawyers, sharing resources, building a coalition. What Dalton had meant to keep separate and silent became united and loud. 3 months after the federal hearing, Richard Dalton was indicted on 14 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and SCRA violations. His bail was set at $500,000. His business assets were frozen. His real estate empire collapsed as properties were seized and sold to pay restitution to his victims. The trial came 9 months later, and Ryan attended every day. He watched Dalton squirm as prosecutor after prosecutor presented evidence of his schemes. He watched victims testify about losing their homes. He watched Dalton's lawyers try and fail to mount a credible defense. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Morrison looked down at Dalton with cold contempt. "Mr. Dalton, you preyed on vulnerable people during their darkest moments. You exploited legal loopholes to steal homes from families, including from those serving our country overseas. The damage you caused goes far beyond financial. You destroyed people's sense of security and trust. This court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and restitution payments totaling $2.3 million. Dalton was led away in handcuffs, and this time Ryan felt no satisfaction in watching, just relief that it was finally over. But the impact of Ryan's case extended far beyond one corrupt HOA president going to prison. Within a year, the Arizona legislature passed the Torres Act, named in Ryan's honor. The law strengthened protections for homeowners against abusive HOA practices, required better notification procedures, mandated waiting periods before foreclosure, and specifically enhanced SCRA protections at the state level. Other states followed. Colorado passed similar legislation, then Texas, then Florida. Within 3 years, 17 states had enacted HOA reform laws directly inspired by Ryan's case. Veterans advocacy groups used his story in lobbying efforts, and federal legislation was introduced to strengthen SCRA enforcement nationwide. Ryan never sought to be an advocate or activist. He just wanted his house back. But when Congress invited him to testify about SCRA protections and HOA reform, he accepted. He sat before a committee and told his story calmly and clearly, explaining what it felt like to be deployed in a combat zone and receive word that your family was being evicted from your home. "We ask service members to sacrifice for their country," Ryan testified. "The least we can do is ensure that while they're gone, their families are protected. The SCRA exists for a reason. It needs to be enforced, and penalties for violations need to be severe enough to deter this kind of abuse." The legislation passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It wasn't often that Congress agreed on anything, but protecting military families was something everyone could support. A year and a half after that desperate phone call in his tent overseas, Ryan stood in his backyard with his platoon brothers, grilling burgers and watching their kids play together. The Cedar Valley HOA had completely changed leadership. The new board issued a formal apology to Ryan's family and to every other family Dalton had targeted. Several of those families had their homes returned or received full restitution. Mrs. Thompson, the Gold Star mother who'd stood with them that day, approached Ryan with a photograph. It showed her son in his Marine uniform, smiling that confident young warrior smile. "I wanted you to have this," she said. My son would have been proud to serve with someone like you. You didn't just fight for your family. You fought for all of us. Ryan took the photo carefully, feeling the weight of what she was entrusting him with. We were just standing up for what's right. That's what heroes do, she said simply. They stand up when others can't. As the sun set over Cedar Valley, Ryan looked around at the community that had transformed through this ordeal. Neighbors who'd been strangers were now friends. Veterans who'd felt isolated now had connection. Families who'd been victimized now had justice. Jennifer came up beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. Their daughters were playing with Mitchell's kids, laughing and carefree in a way they hadn't been during those dark weeks of homelessness. Do you ever think about what might have happened if your platoon hadn't come? Jennifer asked quietly. Every day, Ryan admitted. We'd probably still be fighting in court, drowning in legal fees, maybe lost everything. That's what happened to most of Dalton's other victims. They were alone. But you weren't alone. No, I wasn't. And that made all the difference. Staff Sergeant Mitchell raised his beer bottle in a toast. To brothers who stand together. To families who support each other. And to never leaving anyone behind. The gathered crowd, soldiers, neighbors, veterans, friends, raised their drinks together. Never leave anyone behind. Ryan looked at his home, solid and safe and truly his. He looked at his wife and daughters. He looked at the brothers who'd traveled thousands of miles to stand beside him. And he understood something profound. True security doesn't come from locks and deeds and legal documents. It comes from community, from people who refuse to let you fall, from brothers who answer the call every single time. The HOA had occupied his home while he was deployed, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed Jennifer was alone. They'd assumed Ryan was too far away to fight back. They'd assumed a family separated by deployment was vulnerable and defenseless. They'd forgotten that military families are never truly alone. Behind every deployed service member stands a network of brothers and sisters ready to step up. Ready to defend. Ready to fight battles both overseas and at home. The foreclosure had been voided. The criminal had been imprisoned. The laws had been changed. Justice had been served. But more than that, a community had been reminded of what really mattered.